Hi everyone, and welcome to this week's Archives.com livestream. I'm Amy Johnson Crow. This week's topic, finding your ancestors in the census. The U.S. Census is one of the foundation records for genealogy research. It's probably the best record to start with when you're trying to start climbing your family tree. So today we're going to talk about some tips and some tricks so that you can find your ancestors in more of those census records. Now, before we get started, let's take a quick review of the census. Now, the census is taken every 10 years, and it started with the purpose, and it's still the official purpose of the census, is to apportion the members of the House of Representatives, because it's the House of Representatives that is based on the population of a state. So in order to know how many representatives a state should have, you need to know how many people live in that state. So they started taking the census. And the census started in 1790. And again, it's taken every 10 years. The most recent census that was taken was in 2010. But the most recent that's available to us as researchers is the one taken in 1940. There's a 72-year privacy rule for the U.S. Census. So we're going to have to wait a few more years to get that 1950 census. But the most recent that's available to us is 1940, and there is some great information in that 1940 census. Before you get started, it's so tempting to just jump right in and just start plugging in names, but to have better success in finding your ancestors in the census, there are some things that you should do first. The first thing, gather basic facts so that you can better find and identify your ancestor. Well, what do I mean by basic facts? Well, have at least an estimate of when that ancestor was born. If you know that they were born around 1900, were they born around 1875? You know, there's a big difference between somebody born in 1875 and somebody born in 1900. So if you have an estimate of their birth date, that's going to help you better locate the person that you're really looking for. Do you have an idea of where they were born? Do you have an idea of where they lived? And think about who else should be in the household. If the ancestor you're looking for in a particular census should have been the head of household, who was the spouse? Were there any children who you think should have been living in the household at the time? If the ancestor you're looking for was a child at the time of the census, think about who his or her brothers and sisters were. Think about, those other household members that should be there. That will give you some clues so that you know that that census record that you're looking for pertains to your ancestor and not somebody else with the same name. Because let's think about it. What is the difference? Well, there's a big difference between looking for Stanley Johnson and looking for Stanley Johnson, who was born around 1902 in either Pennsylvania or Ohio, lived in Ohio in the 1940s, had a wife named Marie and a daughter named Jean. So the point I'm trying to make is the more information that you have, even if it's an estimate, the more information you have will give you that more complete picture and will help you be able to narrow down your search, especially when you're looking at someone with a common name like Stanley Johnson. And it will also help you identify that person once you find them in the census. So you have to really think about more than just that person's name. So when you go on to archives.com, you can use the search that is available right there on the home page after you log in. You can just plug in a name and get started. But if you know that you really want to work in the census, what I suggest you do is go up to the top navigation and click here on Search. Because when you go into this search section, you're going to get a lot more options for your search. You can put in more information that will help you narrow down your search. So if you're wanting to look specifically in census records, you can go here to search and you can select census records from this drop down here. And then you can fill in as much information as you want, such as first name and last name. You can narrow it down by what state you expect to find them in. You can add a birth location. If you have an idea of what county they were living in, you can even narrow it down by county. You can put in a birth year, including a range of years. And you can even narrow it down by a specific census. So let's say that you're looking for Stanley Johnson in 1940, you can narrow it down to just the 1940 census. So let's say that I go in and I do that search that I was talking about before for Stanley Johnson, who I kind of suspect was living in Ohio in 1940. I have he and the family living in Ohio later in the 1940s. And one thing I recommend you do when you're adding a birth year is to give yourself a little bit of a fudge factor. I'm pretty sure that Stanley was born in 1902, but the thing about the census is that you never know who was giving the information. So that year might be off by a year or two from what you would expect. So if you give yourself a little bit of that fudge factor, say plus or minus 2 years, it's narrowing the search down enough that you're not getting people who were born in 1875, but it's making it wide enough that it will bring back the records for the Stanley Johnsons who, according to the census, were born in 1901 or 1903. So that's a really good way to narrow down the search enough so that it makes sense. So when I do this search for Stanley Johnson in Ohio in 1902, and I did have it narrowed down to just the 1940 census, I have 8 results. Now, 8 is a pretty good number. You can easily go through 8 records to see which one is the person that you're looking for. But let's say that I really suspect that Stanley Johnson and his family were living in Summit County, Ohio in 1940. What I can do is actually, from the results page, I can actually add the county right here and run the search all over again. I don't need to re-enter the search. I can just tweak it a little bit right here from the results page. So I could enter Summit for this county or for this particular census search. And I still have my 8 results. It's still bringing back all of the Stanley Johnsons in Ohio, but now the ones for Summit County have floated to the top. So I could start looking with these particular records. So again, it's giving me all of the Stanley Johnsons in Ohio, but the ones for the county I've specified have now floated to the top of the results list. So as I'm scanning down through here, I'm looking at the little bit of information that's here on the results page. If I want to get more information, I can simply click on the person's name. And when I do that, it brings up this record detail page, which shows all of the information that has been abstracted from the census record and includes all of the members of the household that were listed. Now, whenever there is an image available for any record, whether you're looking in the census or whether you're looking at death records, no matter what type of collection you're looking at on archives.com, whenever there is an image, always make sure that you click to view that image, because the image could have a lot more information than what is here that's been indexed. And that's going to be the case for the census. So when I click to view the image for this particular Stanley Johnson in the 1940 census, I see the actual census image, and down here I have the Stanley Johnson household. And there's a lot more information than what was indexed for this particular collection. So always make sure that no matter what type of record you're looking at, if an image is available, make sure you look at that image. While we're here on the image page, Just want to point out a couple of features. You can download this image, so you can save this image right to your computer. And you can also save this record so you can find it quickly when you go back to archives.com. So you can see all of the records at a glance, all of the records that you have saved. So you can do that right here from the image. So you've gone through and you've done the search, and you've done the things that I've suggested. You've tried narrowing it down by where you suspect the person was living. You've tried narrowing it down by their birth year, perhaps where they were born, but you still can't find them. What else can you do? Well, does your ancestor have a middle name? If so, try searching that middle name as their first name. So let's say that your ancestor was William Henry Smith. Well, instead of searching by William, search with the first name of Henry. It's pretty common for people to go by their middle names rather than their official first name. So if you're having trouble finding William, search for Henry, if that was your ancestor's middle name. Also, search for others in the household. This is especially good when you're working with a common name. Think about that family. Again, thinking about who else should be in the household. If your ancestor was John Smith, well, there's going to be hundreds and hundreds of John Smiths for your search. But think about who else should have been in the household. If the census that you're looking for should have had his son Zebulon in the household, try looking for Zebulon instead of for John. Again, thinking about who else should be there, and search for somebody that has a more unusual name. Hopefully John Smith didn't just turn around and name all of his children things like John and Mary and William and Robert. Hopefully there's at least one child in there that has an unusual name, and you will often find that to be the case. If you have a good idea of location, especially if you're pretty sure of what county a family was living in a particular census year, try looking for just the surname. Now, you might not want to do the strategy if the surname is Smith or Johnson or Miller, but if the surname is at all uncommon, and by that I mean it's, again, it's not something like Smith or Johnson or Jones, try looking for just the surname, but narrowing it down to that one state and that one county. Again, remember how we added the county, and the records for that county floated up to the top of the results. Then I can scan through and I can see all of the people who have that surname living in that county. It's a really good way of finding people who perhaps were going by nicknames or going by names that, were pretty illegible. Sometimes census takers didn't have the best handwriting. So being able to search just by surname is a good way of picking up the people you're looking for, as well as seeing other people with that surname. You might want to research them and see how they're related as well. If you've been watching any of the other archives.com live streams, you've probably heard me give this advice. Don't skip censuses. When you find your ancestor in the 1940 census, it's really tempting to go immediately back to 1900 or take them all the way back to 1880. You want to find them as a child with their parents, so you end up skipping censuses. It's really tempting to do that, but I advise you don't do that. Don't skip those censuses. Go back census by census every 10 years, because you never know what or who you might find. You might find a census where an unexpected relative is living in the household. Perhaps a parent or a grandparent or an uncle is living in the household. But as you go back census by census, you're also going to get more clues for further research. You might pick up a different birthplace than what you had expected. You might pick up clues about military service or clues about occupation and seeing the neighbors, seeing parents' birthplaces. You're going to pick up more clues with every census. So, as much as you can, fight that urge to go back, 3 or 4 censuses at a time. Go census by census, and you're going to pick up more information. You're going to pick up more clues, and your research is going to be less frustrating because you're going to be more methodical and picking up more clues. It's actually going to help you. You might feel like it's taking longer, but it's actually going to shorten. It's going to make your research a lot more effective going year by year rather than by skipping. All right, next week on the archives.com live stream, we're going to ask the question, how do I know that's my ancestor? You've gone through some records and you have found some records that it names a person with the same name as your ancestor, but how do you really know that that record refers to your ancestor and not somebody else with the same name? That's the question we're going to tackle next week on the archives.com live stream. That will be next Wednesday, October 23rd at the same time, 1 p.m. Eastern, 10 a.m. Pacific. In the meantime, there are a lot of ways you can stay connected with archives.com, whether it is through the blog, liking us on Facebook, following us on Twitter, or watching us or subscribing to our YouTube channel, where we have our previous live streams have been uploaded to the YouTube channel. In the meantime, this is Amy Johnson Crow wishing you happy researching.